So, in the last episode, I pointed out that some of the games in this franchise actually had multiple releases, most of which added their own little changes. Some of these were hardly noticeable, whereas others actually made quite a significant difference. As such, I thought it might be prudent to go over some of these variations and find out which, if any, can be called the ultimate versions. Welcome back to my Metal Gear Retrospective. Before we get into any major details, let me just clarify a few things. I'll only be discussing the various versions of the two PS2 entries in this franchise, namely Sons of Liberty and Snake Eater. I know some of the other games had multiple releases as well, but I already talked about the MGS1 tie-ins, and since there's not as much to say about the later variations, I'd rather leave those for later. Either way, yes, we'll pretty much be looking at Sons of Liberty, Snake Eater, and the enhanced editions named Substance and Subsistence respectively. While there are quite a few changes and additions I intend to talk about, I guess there's already one thing I could mention. I have no idea what the significance or purpose of the new subtitles are. Seriously, what the hell is a Substance version? Are you saying it has more substance than the original? Is that the idea? I guess that might make some sense, but then what about Subsistence? What the further amok does that mean? Well, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, subsistence is the condition of remaining in existence, an essential characteristic quality of something that exists, or the character possessed by whatever is logically conceivable. That certainly clears things up, doesn't it? Okay, so it apparently is somewhat of a reference to the fact that Snake is subsisting on what he can find in the jungle or whatever, but still, kind of a weird and unnecessary change. Sure, just calling these games something like the enhanced or upgraded editions might be a bit boring and straightforward, but at least it would be a bit more accurate and understandable. In any case, that is pretty much what these new releases are supposed to be, enhanced versions of the originals with brand new elements and or modes to enjoy. As mentioned, some changes make little to no difference, whereas others almost transform the game completely. I do think that I ultimately would call most of the changes to Sons of Liberty relatively low-key though. Don't get me wrong, there are both good and bad additions here, but as you'll see, nothing in Substance really feels as significant or necessary as in Subsistence. Or there are things worth talking about, but I for one don't think most of the additions here make that much difference. So what exactly is new in Substance? Well, first and foremost, you now have access to a few new modes. In the original release, you really only had the main game, whereas this version also includes a generous helping of VR missions, a few so-called snake tails, and a skateboarding mode. Wait, that can't be right. I'm sorry, I must have read that wrong. Hang on a sec, I'll check this out. So let's see here. So there's missions of the VR and alternate variety, snake tails, and skateboarding. Metal Gear, skateboarding. What the f- Okay, so Metal Gear has a skateboarding mode now. That seems like a natural choice. After all, when I think Metal Gear, I immediately think skateboard- No, you know what? I can't even finish that. What the hell does skateboarding have to do with Metal Gear? Why the hell would you even consider mixing the two? It just doesn't make sense. Well, to be fair, there are quite a few other modes and features of several Metal Gear games that don't exactly add up, and besides, there actually is a bit of an explanation for this one. You see, this mode is really just a promotional demo for the then upcoming Konami game Evolution Skateboarding. That's right, this mode is nothing but an excuse to promote another Konami game. It's just a demo. Not that there's really anything wrong with this, but it is a bit strange. Then again, they did give the demo a bit of a Metal Gear makeover so that it does tie in somewhat, but still, kind of a weird inclusion. Luckily, this is at least pretty damn fun. No really, this skateboarding mode is actually one of the best additions in this whole game, I'm not kidding you. Yes, it is just a short 2-level demo and it can be a bit tricky, but I genuinely enjoy it far more than any of the other extra modes here. Not that this demo made me or anyone else give two turds about Evolution Skateboarding. Seriously, most people didn't even realize that this came from an actual game, they just thought it was sort of a gag. Way to promote your game, Konami! I guess I should go over this mode in a bit more detail though. As stated, it's basically a short demo consisting of 2 levels set on the big shell, one where you play as Snake and one where you play as Raiden. Your objective is simply to complete a series of skateboarding-based challenges within a certain time limit, at the end of which you'll get scored and ranked based on your performance. These challenges range from gaining a certain score or collecting various items to destroying a few probes and even blowing up the big shell. Yeah, in this mode you actually get rewarded for managing to blow up this entire offshore facility. Guess that's only a bad thing when the terrorists want to do it, huh? Either way, you actually have to complete all of these challenges in one run if you want the best rank. Unlike, say, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which I'm sure the developers of this game never heard of, you can't complete 1 or 2 challenges at a time. You have to do them all in one go. This is rather frustrating, yet effective, as you do become pretty obsessed with perfecting your run. Like I said, this is ultimately a pretty fun little demo, but considering it is just a demo, I guess it's also rather limited in terms of replay value and such. I still like it, but I can't say it alone is a reason to get Substance. This could be good news for some though, as the HD version of MGS2 omitted this demo entirely. Yeah, if you have the HD edition and you were wondering where the hell this game disappeared to, I'm sorry to say you never had it in the first place. Apparently there was some sort of licensing issue with including this mode in the HD versions, which is a bit weird considering it's all made by the same company. I mean, I know I'm a moron, but I really don't get how a company apparently can't get the licensing and or publishing rights to their own game. Seriously, how the hell is that possible? I guess it doesn't really matter that much though, but it's still a bit of a shame. Then again, there's still plenty of other things to enjoy here, like the VR and alternate missions, for example. These are pretty much exactly the same sort of thing we got with the Special Missions expansion for MGS1, only using the MGS2 engine and characters instead. Unfortunately, there's still a bit of a mixed bag. Don't get me wrong, there are some missions here that are somewhat enjoyable, but there's still way too many standard and boring training missions, and it just ends up feeling entirely superfluous and off-putting. Sure, it's nice that you have a bit more choice to begin with, but there's still quite a bit that's locked behind a wall of boredom. You do get to play as quite a few more character varieties though, but they all feel pretty much the same and they just have way too many missions each. In addition, you pretty much have to play through all the missions of the starting characters to unlock the other ones, so this is yet another addition that just ends up feeling like a rather unnecessary chore. That's not to say that everything here is horrible, no. There are several very interesting and memorable missions, especially in the so-called alternate category. I find the bomb disposal mode to be very entertaining, and the photography mode can be both fun and somewhat funny. It's just a shame that these fun, interesting and more memorable missions are relatively few and far between. I guess these missions are ultimately a neat addition, and I can see how some could enjoy them, but for me this is just content for the sake of content. Only a few modes and missions feel truly enjoyable, and the rest are just filler. Still, I wouldn't say there's really anything wrong with this mode as such, it's just kinda meh. Unfortunately, this game also provided us with one more mode that on paper sounded pretty damn sweet, but that turned out to be one of the worst handled, most disappointing and just downright terrible Metal Gear experiences ever. Apart from that. And that. Okay, so maybe it's not the worst, but it's still pretty bad. So what exactly am I talking about? Well, this game has a new mode known as Snake Tales. Like I said, the premise here sounds rather interesting, as it's supposed to be sort of a side story thing where you play as Snake instead of Raiden during the Big Shell incident. Unfortunately, this isn't really what we actually get. At all. Oh, we do get to play as Snake, but instead of letting us experience what Snake was up to while Raiden was doing his thing, we instead get treated to a series of non-canonical, uninteresting and infuriating missions that just happen to take place on the Big Shell. Might not sound too bad, but the stories are stupid, the missions are frustrating and lame, and everything is told through text. That's right, all of the story here is told through these incredibly tedious and dull text screens. Now, I don't mind reading, but that's not exactly what I plan on doing when I put on a fucking video game. At the very least, you could have input some nice artwork or something. This is just boring text on a boring background with absolutely no interactivity or motion whatsoever. It's just so lazy. The issue isn't really the text screens though, they're just kind of annoying. The big problem is the actual gameplay. Sure, it still has certain Metal Gear elements and all, but the missions are way too fucking difficult and or just downright broken. Seriously, the missions barely work half the time because you have almost no way of effectively dealing with the various situations. For example, you usually don't get nearly enough ammo for the one gun you may get, you get swarmed by enemies far too easily and you can't get rid of them when and if you do, and worst of all, you never ever get access to the radar at all. Seriously, you never even get an option to turn it on, it's just not available. Yeah, I just suck and blah blah bullshit. There's absolutely no excuse for this. Sure, some might just see this as an extra challenge, and you didn't get or need a radar in MGS3 either, but this is not the same sort of situation. In Snake Eater, you have camo, you have more places to hide, it's easier to see the enemies coming, it's a completely different setup. Honestly, not having the radar available at all just creates so much frustration. There are so many times when you'll be caught out in the open thinking the coast is clear, only to suddenly hear the alarm go off and find yourself surrounded. Yes, you do get an AP sensor, but it just doesn't seem to work most of the time, or at least not all that well. Speaking of getting surrounded, that also gets ridiculous. Not only do you get swarmed as soon as the enemy sees a shadow of the nail on your toe, but you don't really have any way to properly fend off these guards. Also, even if you do have a hiding spot available, which you usually don't, you most likely won't get to it before you're killed or without the enemy following you there anyway. It's not like there's really anything in these tales worth struggling through this frustrating mess for either. The stories are forgettable at best and just downright insulting at worst. There's no real benefit or purpose to playing as Snake, and the gameplay is just tedious, frustrating, and broken beyond belief. Some might get a little enjoyment out of this mode, but I have no idea who or how. Apart from that, the Substance version of MGS2 also contains various minor tweaks and changes, but most of them are hardly noticeable or of any major significance. I believe the amount and or placement of the dog tags might be slightly different on certain difficulties, and they also included the previously Europe-exclusive European Extreme difficulty in all regions. The only other changes I can think of actually has to do with starting a new game. In the original Sons of Liberty version, you got these extra screens where a voice that may or may not be Rose asks you about your previous experience with the franchise.
Please select your action level. In this game, Metal Gear Solid will be referred to as the previous game. The term cleared means having seen the ending.
There actually was a purpose behind this, as your choice not only determined which difficulty levels you have available, but also what chapter the game would start with. I don't really know why they removed this for the Substance release, but it probably had something to do with the fact that it was a bit unnecessary, interesting as it may have been. All in all, Substance really is the superior version of this game. More specifically, the HD edition is probably your best option, unless you really need to see Snake grinding on a railing of the big shell. Sure, the additions here aren't really all that necessary, and some of them are even pretty awful, but as you still get the excellent main game, it doesn't really hurt to also get a few extra bits and bobs. As relatively little difference as all these changes may or may not make though, the same can definitely not be said when it comes to the changes made to Snake Eater. The Subsistence version added so much and was such a different beast from the original that it almost felt like a brand new game. Honestly, it kinda makes the original seem like a pile of shit. Well, okay, that may be stretching it a bit, but they really did push the boat out with this version. There were so many huge additions, and we might as well jump right to the big one. You see, Subsistence actually marked the first time in the entire franchise that we got a fully manual 3D camera. That's right, in the original Snake Eater release, you had no control over the camera. We still only had a fixed view. This was okay, I guess, but after playing the game with a 3D camera, I don't think anyone wanted to go back to the old fixed one. Sure, there are times when the fixed camera view actually works a bit better, which is why you can still select that one when and if you prefer. Yep, the fixed camera is still available for the times when you may want a different view of your surroundings. It's not like you have to choose one or the other or go in and out of a menu to switch between them either, just click the R3 button and there you go. This is all so convenient and straightforward, it's kind of a wonder that they didn't do this to begin with. Now, you might not think that a new camera really makes that much of a difference, but you'd be so wrong. Again, the original is more than playable, but being able to control the camera just gives you a much better overview of the battlefield. Seriously, just try playing this with the new camera and then go back to the fixed one. The difference is night and day. Oh, and to anyone who says this sort of thing just makes the game easier, shut up! No, shut the hell up! It doesn't make it easier, it makes it more convenient and less frustrating. No, that's not the same thing! Honestly, it's all but impossible to play the original after experiencing this version. Not because the original is bad, no, but because it just doesn't give you the same level of control and awareness of your surroundings. Sure, there's probably some who still prefer the fixed camera, but as that is still available here, there really isn't much of a reason to go for the original release instead. Even if you disregarded the new camera though, there's still more than enough here to make the original release seem a bit wimpy. For me, there's one, or technically two inclusions that was really the sole reason I purchased this game originally. I didn't even need to hear anything else about it when I found out this was included. It was more than enough to justify a purchase. I am obviously talking about the fact that Subsistence also includes the original MSX versions of Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. This marked the first time Metal Gear 2 was released outside of Japan, and the first time anyone outside of Japan or Europe got to try the original game. This is such an awesome inclusion, and the games themselves are still more than playable. Now, some may wonder where to find these games as they don't seem to be in the main menu, and that's because you're using the wrong disc. That's right, this was actually a multi-disc release with the main game on one disc and all the extras on another. There was also a third disc containing sort of a film version of the game, but that was only released with a limited edition in the US. You Americans really didn't miss much though. This is just some re-edited versions of the cutscenes slapped together with some new expositional dialogue in an attempt to create a cohesive story. I personally only used this disc once, and even then I didn't actually finish watching the whole thing. Why would I when the actual game is in the same fucking case? I guess this might be a nice addition if you're not that good at the game but still want to see the full story, but it's still a pretty weird and rather unnecessary inclusion. They never released it again though, so even Konami must have realized that no one really wanted this. Either way, I don't think anyone's crying over not getting this one, or at least they shouldn't be because it's just not worth it. There is a bit of a problem with this whole multi-disc release though, at least nowadays. You see, if you were to try and get a hold of this game now, there's a more than likely chance that several of your available options will only include disc 1. This might be okay for some, but I would strongly urge you to make sure you get disc 2 as well, or you'll lose access to quite a few nice extras. Well, I say it's a problem, but then again, there's the HD edition. This is definitely the most convenient version to get a hold of now, and it does include almost everything, but there are also a few omissions. Some of these aren't exactly big losses, but some might make you think twice before buying this one. For starters, there's the online mode that came with the original Subsistence version. This was the original MGO, and it was heavily featured in the marketing for this game. In fact, I wouldn't have blamed anyone for thinking this was all Subsistence was, because it's pretty much the only thing that was showcased in trailers and even on the box of the game itself. Seriously, judging by the way they showed off this mode, they must have been convinced it was going to be the next big thing. Unfortunately, it didn't exactly set the world on fire. Hell, it didn't even light a stinking match! Okay, so I'll freely admit that I may not be the best judge of this as I wasn't all that interested to begin with, but at least from what I remember, this online mode just wasn't all that good. Fair enough, I couldn't actually play it right away as I didn't have a PS2 Slim or a network adapter, but I did eventually get to try it, and by that time it was already dying. No one wanted to play it. It's not like this really offered all that much in terms of fun, unique online modes either. It only had the standard deathmatch, team deathmatch, and capture the thing modes. Sure, it did have the so-called sneaking and rescue missions as well, but those were pretty much just variations on the capture the thing mode. Either way, there really wasn't anything all that interesting here. All that considered, it wasn't exactly a shock that this mode was killed off relatively quickly. The official servers were shut down just over a year after the game was released, although someone apparently made some unofficial servers, meaning it is still possible to play it. Why you would want to, I don't know, but if you're willing to jump through some hoops, you can still get it running. As you may have guessed though, this is not exactly a huge loss, so the fact that it's not included in the HD edition doesn't really matter. However, there is another mode that was actually included in both the Subsistence and original Snake Eater release that you might miss a bit more. A weird little crossover minigame known simply as Snake vs. Monkey. And no, this is not a fighting game where Snake takes on Donkey Kong. We wouldn't get that until Smash Bros. Brawl. So what is Snake vs. Monkey then? Well, it's basically a crossover with the Ape Escape franchise. Yup, they actually mixed Metal Gear with Ape Escape, and surprisingly, it works pretty damn well. Oh, it's more than a bit goofy, but then that is kind of the point. After all, you can't really take the idea of Snake running around capturing a bunch of cartoon monkeys all that seriously. And yeah, that is pretty much what this mode is all about. Snake trying to capture the monkeys from Ape Escape. There is a rather shoehorned story about the professor from Ape Escape, who's apparently a friend of Otacon's, needing Snake's help to recapture the escaped monkeys, but it's mostly there for a few chuckles. In essence, the game is divided into a few separate levels, each of which requires Snake to capture a set number of monkeys within a certain time limit. These levels uses various locations from the main game, and Snake will have to use stealth and various non-lethal weapons to incapacitate and capture all the monkeys. All in all, this is a really fun little addition, especially if you also like Ape Escape. Unfortunately, this mode is not included with the HD edition. I believe this was a licensing issue as this version was released on both PS3 and Xbox 360, and the Ape Escape franchise is owned by Sony. I still think they probably could have worked something out, or at the very least the PlayStation edition should have been able to keep this mode, but as it is, it's only available in the PS2 versions. Speaking of which, they did remove one more thing from the HD edition, and it's not one of the extra modes. No, it's actually something within the main game itself that was never made available in any other fashion. It was only ever released as part of this game, and yet they couldn't include it in the HD edition? Why the fuck not? Seriously, I don't get why this was removed. It was made by the same company, there wasn't any sort of licensing issue, and although they had intended to create a full game based on this prototype later, that never happened, so I just don't see a reason for removing this. Honestly, the only possible reason is that they just couldn't be bothered. So what the hell am I talking about anyway? Well, in the main game, you might remember that there was a scene where Snake is locked up in a prison cell. At this point, it was originally possible to call up a paramedic and save your game, at which point you'd have a conversation about a certain well-known vampire film.
Snake, have you ever heard of Renfield? It's the name of a character. He's locked up in a cell waiting for the master to return, eating the spiders that crawl along the walls. He waits and waits for ages. Finally, just as he's beginning to forget whether he's human or not, the master comes for him, saying the time has come. Renfield is overjoyed, and there, standing before Renfield in human form was...
Dracula.
Exactly! If you stay there too long, your old buddy Dracula's going to come and get you too.
Now, this dialogue actually did make it into the HD edition, but what it leads into did not. You see, if you at this point quit the game and loaded it back up at a later time, you would originally not go back to Snake in the cell like in the HD edition. You would actually be greeted with this. No, I did not accidentally put in some weird Devil May Cry ripoff for a bit. This is all found in the PS2 versions of MGS3. If you're wondering what the frack you just saw though, or how the hell it has anything to do with Metal Gear, the answer is that it's a nightmare. That's right, Snake is apparently incapable of hearing so much as a mention of Dracula before sleeping without having a nightmare. When the hell did Snake become a damn toddler? I mean, come on! This guy can withstand the worst sort of torture imaginable without giving it a second thought, but mention Dracula's name and he wets the bed? How the hell does that work? In all seriousness though, this whole thing is really more of a fun little Easter egg than anything else, so I guess it's not that big of a deal that the explanation for its inclusion here is a bit silly. In any case, this little minigame known as Guy Savage was actually supposed to be sort of a prototype for a then upcoming game, but the project got cancelled before it even really happened. It's basically just a relatively straightforward hack and slasher, where the objective is just to rip apart as many of these zombie-like creatures as possible. Nothing too special, but a neat little addition. Like I said earlier though, this did not find its way into the HD edition. I was actually fairly surprised when I found out that they had removed it, as I just can't see any reason for doing so. Sure, it wasn't by any means a necessary inclusion, but since it was all made by the same team, I don't see what the problem with leaving it in would be. Maybe they just lost the code or something. Ultimately, there's no question that Subsistence is better than the original release, but what about the HD edition? If all you're interested in is the main game, I'd say go HD, but if you want everything, you need to seek out Subsistence. As good as they are though, I personally don't really think Snake vs. Monkey and Guy Savage are that important, so I would still say the HD edition is your best bet. Now, there are some other minor differences between the various versions of these games, like a few different camos and posters and such, but there's not really anything else worth talking about. Luckily, we still have quite a few other games to get through in this series, starting with an apparently ghostly adventure and some rather acidic card games. You heard me.